afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Shall we start? We're already running about half an hour late, I think, and it's necessary for us. Hello. Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Washington. It's very good to have you back. We have had 2 full days of very exciting discussions and deliberations and opportunities to learn from each other. But in actual fact, for you, those of you who studied the original program, the day, our proceedings here actually started the day before on Monday morning with a breakfast meeting for editors, because of the need and understanding that the media has a very specific role to play. And we wanted to bring them in right from the beginning. And yes, as a result of that, this coalition has brought on an additional member by the Editors Forum of Namibia, who has now subsequently joined the coalition. But the Editors Forum, or the Editors Meeting, was also followed by a very focused training for senior journalists on issues of access to information. So we have our special rapporteur, who is going to take you a little back, just a little further, also to share with you what came out of those meetings. And one of the things that we were hoping to do when we spoke with the journalists is to inculcate the understanding of advocacy journalism, because we really want to see the media coming on as advocates around this particular issue. So, Mr. Robin Tyson, the floor is yours. One of the things that we will also be dealing with a little later is the official communique. We're still in the process of drafting it, and we will share it with you. Mr. Tyson will take us through the deliberations, the summary that he's made of the last 3 days. We will again open the floor for a very limited time to take on additional recommendations, if there are any. But I am sure that after you've listened to Mr. Tyson, that you will feel that he has captured your discussions and your aspirations very clearly. Robin?
So let me keep your attention by moving around. I did a talk of the nation once, and I think Gwen wrote something in the Namibian that said Robin looked like Namibia's Oprah Winfrey, because I was dancing around. So I'll start here, then I'll move over there to keep your attention. And I have another trick, but I don't think it'll work with you. Normally with my students I say, the exam question number 1 is, and it's amazing how you get their attention. Certainly you can, but I don't think it'll work with you. There won't be an exam on this workshop. Let me give you, I've got 3 things to do. Number 1, a summary of what we did today, very brief, just as I did this morning. Number 2, I want to share with you, as Zoe said, the recommendations that the journalists, it was quite a small working group, came up with on Monday afternoon at the end of their training workshop. And the 3rd thing is maybe just a few, what I felt were cross-cutting issues that I picked up during our 2 days here. This morning we spoke about socioeconomic rights. There was an interesting example given from India, where the government gave food rations, and it was through access to information that people were eventually able to find out that there was corruption going on, because they saw the accounts, and when they saw that, they could see the corruption that was happening. We spoke about gay lesbian issues. The National Framework on HIV does mention now in Namibia these minorities, but of only recently interventions have been made. There's minimal information in Namibia for these communities. There is little that talks about their issues. We also spoke about the fact, of course, there is unequal access to information across different economic sectors. It's maybe obvious, but it was just stressed that those with more information have lower HIV prevalence rates. Those with less information, of course, HIV prevalence rates are higher. Maria Capere from the CCN, it's a difficult organization that, when I was reading news, I always wanted to say the name of that broadcaster, CNN, yeah, CCN. Civic society and the church need to look at our competencies. She spoke quite a lot about leadership and management skills, and she said they needed to transfer the institutions so that they were competent. Sorry, there was interesting, in the discussion afterwards, there's something interesting about South African access to information law, getting communities to buy in and understand the importance of access to information. They asked communities, for example, when will the house be built for me? And it was explained that a mere letter to the mayor wasn't enough. In South Africa, you had to actually have an official access to information request. And what we also learned is the process didn't stop there, because after they got that information, they didn't quite know what to do with it. So it was an ongoing, basically a dialogue. We spoke about media. 60% of Namibians depend on the media for their education in terms of human rights. This was a study quoted by Karen. The Namibian constitution guarantees freedom of the media, but how free can the press be without access to information? She spoke about some of the laws that restrict access to information, and the most ominous one is the Protection of Information Act that actually physically or legally forbids a person from revealing any government information. She also spoke about the fact that there were often long delays in receiving information. Gwen Lister spoke about the fact that in our campaigns we need to talk about the people, obviously, and not just the media. Naim Gorlick remembered that when he was at the NBC, they held community meetings about how the community felt radio content could be improved, and they didn't have a clue because they were quite happy with the way things were. So again, that shows that when we're doing access to information, we need to look at the communities. There was something about the fact that Gwen Lister also mentioned the media will have to look at whether the wider public will be served, or is it just information for just a few. She was talking in particular about press releases. NGOs love to sort of dump press releases on the media and assume that we're all very interested in it. And she says one of the things the media has to think about is this information just for, I think she gave the example of veterans who are collecting money at a few points in Namibia, or is it for their readership or as a whole? So it's something that NGOs need to think about. This afternoon, we spoke about international and regional experiences, and I'm not going to summarize that because I think, hopefully, I've added quite a lot of that in my next presentation. You can give me a round of applause if you want to. Thank you. That was just to warm up your hands. All right, so I said I would, first of all, the second thing I wanted to do is just show you what we discussed on Monday, and there were two questions that were asked of the journalists. What strategies... Yeah, I think I'll take that one. So, oh, sorry, Zoe, I was going to grab... I'll grab this one. Otherwise the gentleman can't see. So the first question was, what strategies can be adopted in the drafting process of the legislation? The second was, what advocacy strategies can be adopted to ensure enactment of access to information legislation in Namibia? The first one, the question again, the strategies that can be adopted. We need to involve, and I think this is another cross-cutting issue, but I'll come to that now. Key stakeholders, some of them that were mentioned. Namibian law, civil society, media, academia, anti-corruption commission, filmmakers. I wonder who mentioned that. I bet his name began with an M. International development partners, members of the public, and the government, of course, should be in this process. We need to identify key issues that should be reflected in the bill. We should be guided by international and regional law, and we need to do research on best practice. We should take the bill to the Ministry of ICT and Ministry of Justice in a consultative draft process. Parliamentary Standing Committee on Law would also have to be involved, as well as the Law Reform Commission of Namibia. And there needs to be publicity and lobbying, and also maintaining pressure on the need for such legislation. There must be hype created as to why this bill is important, and it should be a participatory process with consistent and constant engagement with stakeholders and the public through meetings, media, press releases, etc. In terms of the advocacy strategies, what strategies can be adopted? Number one, educate the public so that they are aware of the campaign and they buy into it. They must know the importance of the legislation to the public. It should not just be seen as something just for the media. I think Gwen Lister said that also this morning. There should be buy-in from all civic society organizations. They should know why it is important to have such a bill, mainstream the issues into other areas of civic activism. Influential parliamentarians, maybe some of them are here today, should be identified to push the agenda. Simplified versions of the campaign and the bill, and also summary versions, should be written and given to parliamentarians. They're busy people. We heard in some countries they don't read. Provision of technical support to legislators. Number 6, ensure that the campaign is a topic issue at all forums. Churches, rallies, media should also carry the campaign forward as a topical issue. Number 7, various modes of media should be used for disseminating this message. SMS messages, for instance, messages, community radio, and the right media, of course, would change according to the different communities, depending on which community you're aiming at. Using celebrities, especially youth celebrities, this is quite popular in Namibia. They could be spokespersons for the campaign. Petitions can be used and engage legislators at their constituent level. So that's what we discussed on Monday, and it's actually interesting. We discussed that without having had all of the discussions that we've had yesterday and today, and without learning from the experience from some of the other countries which we heard today. So this is my third and final document. It's kind of, as I was going along, I was just trying to jot down some what I thought were cross-cutting issues, and I've mentioned some of them already. Number 1, we need to use a multi-sectoral approach, civil society, ministries, media, etc., etc. The second one I really got from our discussion this afternoon, from all of those various countries, what we learned in terms of the process of getting further with this. Number 1, we need to do thorough research on the process. We heard that the process is different in different countries. Do we use a private member's bill? Do we work through the ruling party? Which ministry? How are things done? I think in one country they had to wait 8 years with the policy before they could implement the law. So we need to know some of these things. Number 2, consultation. Number 3, drafting of the law and validation. I thought that was quite interesting. Consulting with communities, but once the, sorry, not the law, the bill. Once the bill had been drafted, it would be validated in various communities. Using the Africa-wide coalition, some of them are here with us for this meeting, and other African international assistance. The African Information Center was mentioned, and of course the draft model law that Advocate Tlakula mentioned. A country core coalition is needed. A select group of organizations or even people who are going to drive this process forward. And it was also mentioned that obviously finances are needed to keep that process going. We should note, of course, and several speakers made note of them, the existing Namibian commitments. We've signed documents and policies and charters and etc., etc., and that can be one of the tools used to drive the Namibian government to actually legislate this. Petition. I think marches were also mentioned from Nigeria. We could do that. Make a summary. Again, I mentioned that before, but it's going to be quite dense legal language, and it's important to make a summary. It could be for the parliamentarians, it could be for the media, it could be for citizens. This idea of a text message campaign to lawmakers, I don't know if we've tried that in Namibia. The only people I know that do a text message campaign is the Windhoek Country Club, who send me a text every 5 minutes telling me to come and gamble my money. Do you get that? Yeah, at the casino. Somebody, can I block it? I'll speak to you later. I got a nice message from the Ministry of Health once, which was quite effective, and it said, what did it say? Have you been coughing recently, or is somebody next to you coughing? In which case, get yourself checked for TB. Yeah, exactly. But I'm joking, but I think those are actually quite effective campaigns, and it got through to me because somebody was coughing next to me when I got the message. So. The idea of somebody else come up with this idea of campaigning on thematic areas. Yeah. So what does this legislation or this proposed legislation mean for you in your different areas? I think it was again Nigeria spoke about training for the media, especially the idea of training political reporters and also training for grassroots organizations. The awareness generating campaign amongst the public, of course. The using of media for, I think it was mentioned, jingles on radio stations, publishing access to information, access to information, that's wrong, in the newspapers. Using religious groups, we can get Mama Kapere to give us a sermon in the churches on ATI. Using business groups and private organizations, government agencies. We had the Anti-Corruption Commission here. We had the Office of the Ombudsman here. We could also involve maybe the Anti-Corruption Commission. What I thought was quite important, somebody mentioned 2 campaigns. The number one is a high-level campaign, media, etc., but also we need to have a low-level campaign with engagement, with meetings, one-on-one sessions, follow-up on the process, etc. And the last thing there in terms of that process, I think, was this idea of keeping records and keeping correspondence, something we're notoriously bad at doing, but we're reminded throughout this process as civic organizations to keep records and correspondence. Just some of the other things that came up, not really part of the process, but just ideas that I picked up. Number one, this idea of allaying fears. Maybe it's not just from the ministers, I put them in the ministers, but there may be other areas in society that have got fears, even the private sector. So we need to allay those and address them and maybe understand them and empathize with them. Outlining the advantages of ATI for all sectors. So, what is the advantage of ATI for government? What's the advantage for us as civic society? What's the advantage for us or me as academia, etc.? The idea of building leadership skills, we mentioned that already. We need to think about what institution is going to run access to information. This came up several times, and there were several ideas. Should it be under this office? Should it be an independent organization? Should it, who's going to fund it, etc.? Where will you go to if you have a complaint? Must you go to the Supreme Court, which is very expensive, or will there be a sort of freedom of information ombuds person who can deal with that? Would it be part of the Office of the Ombudsman, for example? Creating a demand for information. Many of the speakers said we're quite apathetic in Namibia. We don't really want the information, so we've got to create that demand. Catering for different languages. We heard from Justin Ellis. I was talking to my friend Rita now, who publishes a paper in Kavango region, but we heard from Justin Ellis that they don't know how many people in that region, how many students in that region speak what language. Tlediko, Bukushu, and what's the third one? Exactly. People with disabilities, women, LGBTI communities, and it's not just LGBTI, it's also MSM, WSW. What's MSM? MSM is men sleeping with men, which is not the same as G. And WSW is not the same as L. Speak to Linda, she'll explain. That's another workshop. And this idea of rural audiences as well. Several speakers said media seems to be dominated, or information seems to be dominated in Windhoek, even though the majority of the population live outside of Windhoek, so we need to be careful about that. The idea of keeping records effectively, not just us as civil society organizations, but I think mention was made of the government. If the government is not keeping effective records, they can open, I think Justin Ellis also mentioned that, they can open up their doors, but, where's the information and is it up to date? Private and public information. And one question that kept coming up, what will the restrictions be? Or the exemptions? National security, for example. But I think several speakers said we need to be quite specific about exactly what we mean under those exemptions. Journalists kept mentioning this idea, timely distribution of information. I think several speakers said it takes 2 months to get information from some ministries. That's if you're lucky. The second last one is this idea of proactive publication. Before people ask for the information, it should be made available. I was going to say, here comes the NBC, but 2 minutes before the end of but it's not true. And the last one is, there was a little bit of debate about this. We've got the technology fanatics like Joris and myself, and then we have those who are a little bit suspicious. I think Stanley was one of them, and my friend from Nigeria was another, who are a little bit worried about, or who are concerned about content, that we need to have local content and African content on this platform, yeah? So this idea of using new media technologies and maybe encouraging the idea of interaction. So once you've got the information, maybe you still have some questions, and technology can be used to maybe answer those questions. I want to assure you that that's not my virus. It's Misa's antivirus that is out of date. And if they'd installed Ubuntu, they wouldn't have had to have virus protection. Yeah, give me a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin, for that very comprehensive summary. We are going to open the floor for 10 minutes for anyone who feels that an issue or has been omitted from the summary. Is there any particular issue that is not reflected there? Is there a mic at the back? Okay, in the meantime, let's just go ahead.
Yeah, it was only one small issue which our colleagues from West Africa pointed out, that they had a bad experience because they left out talking to some high government officials who then felt very insulted and basically blocked the whole process. So I think that needs to be included, that don't exclude the high government officials in your lobbying or talking.
I'm just curious to know, because when we received the invitation, there was a session on ATI in industries. Now I'm just curious to know why it was removed.
Yes, Lady Chair, I think Robin has excluded something very important, because although we've done some good paper, although we've done good paper. Just sit down, just sit down. Yes, thank you. I have mentioned the indignant movement. I've mentioned the fact that people should start, although in the experience we were told about marches. Coming back to the Namibian situation, I emphasize the fact that we should demonstrate, that we should stand up and ask and fight for these rights. And this is a very important part of the whole thing which was excluded, I believe. It should not only be us going to, we should approach cultures. We say that it's too expensive to employ lawyers in this. But the people's power must now be seen. And that's very important. Thank you.
Yeah. Just as additional commentary maybe that was also made earlier, the fact that the gathering of such a kind is really, really commendable in society, and it also depicts the civil war that currently exists amongst us, that needs to be used to spark the political will that will ensure that government perhaps buys into the concept itself through various, of course, incentives that needs to be produced and presented to government and other stakeholders. Also looking at the possibilities of developing mechanisms and projects that can actually at a later stage translate this law, maybe upon passing, translate the law into an actual service that the public can demand when a need for such service arises. And through that we can actually raise a public expectation for such a service to be delivered, from where we can actually derive measurable deliverables in terms of access to information, as well as measure performance of government and other stakeholders. Thank you.
There was something I mentioned earlier which I think is missing. Maybe it's not important, but I think it is. I said for us to be effective advocates, we really need to enlighten ourselves about the issues, about the principles, standards, and familiarize ourselves with any bill that is developed. Otherwise, we would not be able to engage and debate the issues with those we are lobbying. Some of them may be quite enlightened about the issues, and if they raise issues and we're not able to engage them, we would fail in our advocacy. So I think it's very important that we enlighten ourselves about the issues.
I think on the same point, on enlightening ourselves, there was an issue about allaying fears about principles of national security vis-a-vis access to information. So I think it's something that needs to be clearly spelled out somehow.
Thank you. I think that Robin has captured all those comments. There's only one question actually that was asked about the reason for dropping the initially planned session on access to information and industries. The reason for that is that all the people that we invited to come onto the panel subsequently didn't respond and did not avail themselves for it. What we then subsequently did is to consider the fact that maybe the original finance panel as it was structured was possibly too narrow. And if you look at the program, you will see that it's the economics panel, and we then brought in additional panelists to serve on that. You must consider also that this was a very, very important consultation, and I personally am very excited because I've seen so many people come, and I didn't think that people would be interested for 2 solid days to come and discuss these issues. So there's certainly, I think there's a general consensus that access to information is an important issue for Namibians to tackle. And what we will do after this conference, I think I also indicated that earlier today, is to go back to the various sectors and sit with them again and work with them to further articulate the particular issues that those sectors would like to see in a draft bill. The other thing that must also be considered is that, we are proposing a campaign for the next 18 months. In our experience of campaigning, it's the fact that campaigns change and you have to be flexible and you have to be creative. Because your first draft is going to change about 20, 30 times in order to be responsive to a particular need that arises. But the one thing that we can say is that there is a definite push and a need for this legislation and an obvious interest in it. Our organization, MISA, has made the commitment. The rest of the coalition members certainly have made the commitment, and we know that many, many more individuals and institutions will come on board. So please keep an eye on the website www.actionnamibia.org. It will be updated frequently. Just so that you have the initial information that comes out. But within a few months, we will definitely be launching a multimedia, multi-pronged campaign that is going to attempt to involve all Namibians from all walks of life. So, one more comment.
I know it's a question. Is it Lisa who's organizing the 18-month campaign, or is it the coalition?
Well, MISA is one of the members of the coalition. MISA Regional Secretariat and MISA Namibia. We are active members of the coalition. We also understand that, this coalition is going to become much broader, and hopefully we'll have 100, 200, 300 institutions signing onto it, but we will have to retain a core group of people with expertise then from all the various sectors, because we also know that this initial coalition